you, Car? I've got it. So today we want to put all the stuff that we've done so far together in one thing. It'll probably take long. Before I go, I knew there was an announcement I had to make. Just to remind you, this was planned from the very beginning of the semester, but we have no class on Thursday, and we have no class next week. Thursday, because we're going off on a trip to do health checkups for my wife, and next week because it is economics reading. No class for the next 3 classes, and then we're back again. So this is going to take more than one class to do. 2 classes to do it, in fact, is what it should take. But we want to put what we've got together. And so we have, at this stage, sort of a model of the real economy. It's a very simple model, but this is the Keynesian cross diagram, saying where do we think production comes from? Why do people make stuff? How much stuff gets made? And it's saying that it's all based on how much people want to buy. You're going to make stuff to meet demand, right? And we get the Keynesian cross diagram, we get the government spending multiplier, etc. And we have another story, a very simplified story about the financial system that says there's a certain amount of money in the economy that we control, and we can change that amount of money that's in the economy, and that's going to affect the nominal interest rate, I. But in fact, we're normally going to be thinking about the goods market and the financial markets as connected. They affect each other. And so we really want to put them together. And the ISLM model is a model that takes what we have so far and puts it together in one story so you can see how the financial market affects the goods market and how the goods market affects the financial market. So we're going to derive your IS curve, we're going to derive your LM curve, and we're going to talk about the economy's equilibrium in both the goods market and the money market, putting it all together. We're going to have a line going up, we're going to have a line going down, and we're going to have a magic point where they cross. This is what you're expecting here because it's economics. You know that that's how it works. Line going up, line going down, magic point where they cross. And our line going down is going to be our IS curve. Our line going up is going to be the LM curve. And equilibrium is going to be where they cross, right? And what we're going to get out of this, the big thing we're going to get out of this is, first of all, a way to talk about this. And secondly, we're going to get a notion of crowding out. And the idea here is going to be, the punchline is going to be, before, when we were talking about the Keynesian model, we could increase output just by increasing government spending. And we could do that indefinitely. Increase government spending, output would go up by more than that. Could increase government spending again, output would go up by more than that. Now, there's going to be a number of reasons why that's not literally something that's going to happen in the real world, where we can't get infinite output by increasing government spending. The most important one is going to be that there's a limit to the amount that we can produce, the potential output. We're not getting there yet, but this other one that we have is crowding out, which is that as you increase government spending, it's going to have an effect on private investment. So increasing government spending is going to decrease private investment. And so you're doing this at a cost of investment. If you want to increase government spending, get output higher, you can do that, but private investment is going to go down. And this is important because private investment, fundamentally, the way we've defined it, is the things that people are doing to be more productive in the future. And so you're sort of getting something today at the expense of your future, because private investment goes down. Okay. So that's where we want to go with this. The other thing to say about this model is not super fashionable these days. For those of you who don't have the book, my book has ISLM in it. Many books do. Many introductory books do. Maybe you do. Yours do. If you look in the index, find out if ISLM is there. If it's not there, many introductory books don't have ISLM in it. If it's not there, don't freak out. The internet is full of resources on ISLM. It's good. Search for ISLM, read your Wikipedia entries, you're good to go. The thing to say, though, is that it is not a super popular model these days. And it's not super popular model these days for just the reasons we've seen so far. It's going to be built on what we have so far. And what we have so far is super simple, perhaps too simple, right? It doesn't have potential output in it. So we're going to have this whole model that doesn't have a potential output in it. It doesn't have explicitly people making decisions. We say investment's going to be a function of the interest rate, which we'll say in a minute. Right? Well, we have a story for that, but we don't have it explicitly in there how they're doing that. It doesn't have prices in there. It doesn't have foreign trade in there. So there's a lot of important stuff that we're leaving out. And so there's various versions of this model that you'll see that will have a third line in it. Here we got a line up, line down, magic point where they cross, but there's many other versions, more sophisticated versions, that have a third line, either a line representing international trade, here the OP line, or a line representing price increases. Right? We'll have something else going on as well to make it more sophisticated. You don't want that. Right? You do, but you don't want it now. Right? You want to learn the basic model first, and then you can fancy it up. And even those aren't really in vogue these days. They're not really the way professional economists are supposed to think about the world, because it's again built on a very simple model, and that's been fancied up over time, right? But of course, you're new to this, so you have to learn from the beginning, and so that's the thing. On the other hand, this is a dirty little secret, but it gives the right answers. We have fancier, harder, more complicated models, and they change things in nuanced ways, but they don't change things in major ways, like the results, the implications. The crowding out that we're going to see out of this model is still there in all your fancy models as well. Right? And so what people will actually do is they're talking about these things, and then they're thinking about these things, and what they will do is they will, a little napkin, nobody's seeing, they'll draw the ISLM model, and that will give the right answer. And then they'll justify it with fancier models. So it's really nice in the fact that it does give the right answer, but of course we're leaving lots of things out. So the answers you get out of this model are not wrong, but of course there's more nuance to be gotten from fancier models. Okay? What this means for you is if you're looking for a book to help you with this, check the index, make sure it has ISLM in it. Right? Go to the library, look at the Wikipedia page, it's all fine. Right? It's well-established stuff. So it's not like there's lots of controversy about it or anything. So what you find will be good. But then check and see if there's a third line. If there's a third line in your graph, that's not the one you want. Yeah, you want to go down the third line. It's just ISLM, not ISLM BP, not ISLM fancied up. Just a straight basic ISLM, what you want to look for. Okay. So the way this is going to work is we have our two things that what we've got so far, we've got our Keynesian cross diagram with a 45-degree line, and it's Y, it's planned aggregate expenditure, which is just C plus I plus G plus X force. And that's going to be our model of where, sort of fundamentally where output comes from. We have all these barbershops, they all have fixed their price, the price is fixed, and then they just decide, they just wait to see if a customer comes in. And if a customer comes in, they cut the hair. If a customer doesn't come in, they don't cut the hair. That's our fundamental story. And so this is where haircuts come from. This is where the output of goods and services come from. Obviously, we want to fancy that up. We want to make it more realistic as we go along, but for now, that's what we got. That's our model of the goods market. And this is fundamentally sort of the driving force of this story, and it's going to tell us what level of output we've got. Okay. We also have another story, which I will do in blue, and I will do it down and to the left. And the down and to the left is on purpose. I know normally I'm sloppy. Well, I'm still sloppy, but I'm doing it down and to the left for a reason. So if you're taking notes, do yours down and to the left for a reason you don't know yet. Right. And this is our money market. And so we've got the amount of money in the economy, and we have the price of money, which is the nominal interest rate, and we've got the demand for money, and also often called L for liquidity, demand for liquidity, right? And we've got So this is our financial market. And this determines the nominal interest rate. Fundamental. Now, these things, as drawn, could just live on their own, right? There could be a financial market that does its goofy thing, there could be a goods market that does its goofy thing, and there could be, potentially, no connection between them. Except we already have one connection between them. And that is, we know that money demand is going to depend on how rich we are. If we have a lot of, if we're really wealthy, Y is really high, we're going to demand more money. Because why? We're rich people, we want to buy stuff. Money is the thing that makes it easy to buy stuff. So if we are rich, we're going to have money demand shifted off to the right. If we are poor, we're going to have money demand shifted off to the left. So we have a connection there between the goods market, which determines what our income is, and the financial market. So we have the goods market is going to affect the financial market. Because the goods market is going to determine Y, and that's going to determine where money demand is, and that's going to influence the interest rate. On the other hand, who cares, right? Like it's really nice if those bond traders get really rich and all that. That's lovely, but like honestly, who cares? Like somebody gets rich, good for them. Good for them. Leave me alone. Be rich. Right? This is a money market. We're just moving little slips of paper around. I know in commerce, for the business people, making money is important. But for us economists, we're used to being poor. And so we don't worry so much about that. We worry more about the goods market, about the amount of goods and services produced. Because moving money around, moving financial stuff around in the first instance is really just moving wealth from one person to another. And we don't have a lot useful to say about that. There's a lot that could be said about that, but you want to go to your philosophers and those people to talk about that. We don't really have, if you take money from this guy and give it to that guy, we don't have anything useful to say that you can't just say as a human being, right? But we do have something useful to say about output. So we're much more concerned about output than we are about the interest rate or financial stuff, generally speaking. Now, you may notice that if you sort of look out in the world, economists are always talking about the financial markets. And that's because we also think that the financial markets are going to affect the real side as well. Okay. Here, so far in my little story, we don't have that. We have the real side affects the financial markets, because that's going to shift money demand out as we get richer or poorer. But we don't have the financial markets affect the real side. But we know that they do. We know that they do for a number of reasons. Like we've been talking about banking. If the banking system has a lot of money in it, then there's a lot to loan out. Right? And that's going to affect businesses in lots of ways. We're not going to be fixated on that here, but that's clearly there's a connection between the financial market in terms of banking and how much what's it called? Credit is available to your businesses. And that's important for what they can do. Right? So, we know it matters. But here we're talking about a different way that it matters. And that is, so far we have a link that Y affects money demand. Right? That's a link going in this direction. We're also going to have a link going in the other direction. And that's because we are going to assume that investment is a function of the real interest rate. That is, if the real interest rate is high, that is, if you take your wealth and you loan it to somebody, you get lots and lots of return on that. And if you borrow, you have to pay a lot to borrow. In that case, if you're paying a lot to borrow, it's got to be a really good investment before you think it's worth it. Because you can either borrow money, paying the interest rate, and do your investment, or you can not, right? And so your return on your investment has to be bigger than the cost of borrowing. So if the cost of borrowing is really high, only really, really great investment opportunities will be done. Whereas if the cost of borrowing is really low, kind of marginal investment opportunities will be done. Because it's so cheap to do it anyway, why not? And so our thought is going to be that if the interest rate goes up, then investment goes down. That's going to be our story. And that is a connection between the money market, the financial market, and the goods market, right? Because the real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate minus the rate of inflation. And so there's a connection between the real interest rate and the nominal interest rate. And in our story so far, and not in real life, but in our story so far, prices are fixed, right? Prices don't change. So in our story, nothing that happens is ever going to change inflation. And so if the nominal interest rate goes up, the real interest rate goes up as well. And so if the nominal interest rate goes up, the real interest rate goes down. The real interest rate goes up and investment goes down. And so that gives us a connection between the goods market, the money market, and the goods market. The nominal interest rate goes up, then the real interest rate goes up, which means investment goes down. So now these two are intertwined. One thing to notice is that things are much more direct here than they are over here. Much more indirect, sorry. Much more indirect. If the nominal interest rate has to go up, if the nominal interest rate goes up, then what happens to the real interest rate? Well, in our little story, it's simple. But in real life, why did the nominal interest rate go up? Probably we changed the money supply. And if we're changing the money supply, probably that's going to affect inflation as well. And so it's not as obvious that there's a direct connection between I and R, like I've been saying so far. Right? So that might be a problem. And then will investment actually change? That will be a problem as well. Right? That's another place for it to go wrong. But at the moment, this is what we got. So we have this chain of events that causes the financial market, the money market, to affect the real market as well. So these things are going to be intertwined. And so we're going to need a story or a way to think about how they're intertwined. And that's going to be our IS element curves. Okay. So I'm going to start out with IS. And our story is we're going to have a new graph. That is our ISLM. That shows the connection between these markets. And in particular, we see that Y affects the goods market, the money market. And we see that I affects the goods market. So we want to graph those two things, those interconnections. Right? Our interconnection terms are Y and I. That's how things get connected. So our graph is going to graph I and Y. Because those are our two terms that connect these two markets. Now, always with graphs are not really the model. The model we would put into math if we wanted to do it for real, but it's easy enough to do. But graphs are a way that make us learn something from the model. So it's all well and good to plug it into math. If you didn't learn anything, well, you got the answer. What does that get you? Right? We're doing this to learn. We're doing this to learn about the economy. We don't think this really is the economy. This is obviously a simplification of the real world. And so getting a precise answer mathematically is a great way to check that our intuition is correct, but it's not a great way to build intuition. It can be, but very often it's not. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do it graphically just so that we can learn, which is the whole point of the exercise. Okay, so I'm going to build a graph that has I and Y on it, connecting these two industries. And I'm going to look at these industries, these two markets, the goods market and the financial market. And I'm going to start by looking at them one at a time. I'm going to look at this graph between I and Y, just looking at the goods market. That's going to give me my IS curve. Then I'm going to look at connect this graph of I and Y, just looking at the money market. And that's going to give me my LM curve. And only then going to put them together. Right, so for all of these things, you want to think of them as separate, and then the graph is what shows us the interaction. So each of these lines is always going to be a separate discussion, a separate thought process, separate set of motivations for the people in the economy, and then we put them together. Think about them separately. Okay, so I'm going to start out with my IS curve. Here's the goods market. So I'm doing the goods market, so it's just this graph we know and love. Lovely graph. Y. And aggregate expenditure. 45-degree line. C plus I plus G plus net exports. And aggregate expenditure. And that gives us the equilibrium of Y. That is our equilibrium level of output. That's how much is getting produced, how many haircuts are getting produced in this economy. Okay, given all that. But notice as we drew this, well, actually, so now down below this, I'm going to draw a new graph, and I'm going to draw this so it connects Y and I, because those are my two interconnections between the financial market and the goods market. Right, Y is our goods market, that affects the money market. I is coming from the money market, that affects the goods market. So I'm going to connect those two. And I have Y on the x-axis here, so I'm going to put Y here as well, so that I can just go up and down and compare these two. Right, so I have Y on the x-axis here, Y on the x-axis here, and so I can just say this Y is in fact the same as that Y. Just carry it right down. And then on the other axis, I'm going to put the nominal interest rate, because that's the figment of the money market. All right, so when I drew this top graph, what did I do? Well, I said this line represents C plus I. Remember, I is a function of the real interest rate, plus G plus net exports. And I said for all different Y's, how much do they want to spend? For this level of Y, they want to spend this much. If they had no Y, this is how much they want to spend. If they had tons of output, this is how much they would want to spend. Right. Taking all that into account. Okay. So when I was doing that, I was keeping the real interest rate constant. I was keeping investment constant. Okay. So for a given level of investment, I traced out for each different level of Y how much they wanted to buy. And that gave me the equilibrium level of Y. So I did all this. To get all these points on this line, I had to try different, okay, if we had this income, how much would we buy? If we had zero income, we would buy that much. Keeping interest rate constant. Keeping interest rate constant, if we had this level of income, we would buy that much, and so on. We kept interest rate constant throughout that exercise. And that gave us this level of Y. So that must be for a particular level of the interest rate. So, I don't know what level of the interest rate that was. Suppose it was for this level of interest rate. So we have a point there. If this is the level of the interest rate, here is the equilibrium level of output. Okay? Just from what we had before. Because I just picked it out of the air, picked a particular level of the interest rate. That particular level of the nominal interest rate gave us a particular level of the real interest rate, and that gave us a certain level of investment. Very convoluted chain of events, but we had a particular level of investment as we drew that whole line. Now suppose that the level of the interest rate changes. Remember, that's a fixture of a creature of the financial system. Interest rate changes for some reason. Don't know why, it changes. Let's suppose, for instance, that the interest rate goes down. I don't know why. Totally arbitrarily, I'm trying a different level of the interest rate. Okay? So now we have this level of interest rate. But what happens in the top graph? Well, everything is the same except for investment. With this new lower interest rate, we now have higher investment than we had before. Because Because with a low interest rate, even very marginal investment projects are worth doing because you can't do anything else with your wealth. If you're borrowing money, it's cheap. If you're lending money, you don't get anything for it, so you might as well invest it. Either way, investment looks more attractive. Remember, we've redefined the word investment not to include borrowing and lending, just to include the building of the factories and stuff like that, going to school, that kind of thing. And so, if there's nothing else good to do with your wealth, you might as well invest it. The interest rate is low, there's nothing else good to do with your wealth. If you don't have any wealth and you're thinking, I'm going to borrow, the interest rate is low, then, well, it's cheap to borrow. I might as well borrow some money and invest it. Right? And so as I lower the interest rate, again, arbitrarily, lowering my interest rate, then investment is going to go up. And so that's going to shift this whole curve upward as investment goes up. Interest rate went down, investment went up, that whole curve shifts up. If I do that, we get a new level of output, called y prime. And so I can carry that down. I have this new interest rate that I arbitrarily picked. Totally arbitrary, I did it, I just forced it, right? And carry that down, go to where? Right. And that gives us a new point. That is also an equilibrium. So what we're doing is we're tracing out all the combinations for each and every possible I. What is the equilibrium level of y? And so I can do that, I can trace all of those out, and that's going to give me each of these points that I put down represents equilibrium in the goods market. That's the equilibrium level of output that's going to be produced given that interest rate. Okay? Now we're not thinking the goods market is determining the interest rate, but for a given interest rate, it's going to react differently. For low interest rates, we're going to have high output. For high interest rates, we're going to have low output. And so we're just tracing that out. I feel like I should do one more. And I feel like this is going to be messy. I'm going to do my one more in red. I know it's going to be messy. It's always messy. Do my one more in red. And this time I'm going to make the interest rate go up to I double prime. A new higher interest rate. Like so. What happens then? So we're starting from the black line, and the interest rate goes up. That means things that used to be profitable investments no longer are, because I have to borrow more. I have to pay more when I borrow in order to finance them. So it was I had to pay 10%. The interest rate was 10%. I had to pay 10% on my borrowing, but I thought there was going to be a 12% return on this investment, so it was worth doing. Now the interest rate is 15%, and I'm only going to get a 12% return on my investment. It's not worth doing. So when I increase the interest rate, some investment projects are no longer going to be worth doing, and I'm going to cut back on investment. So I'm going to get a shift down in this curve. I'm going to shift it down a lot, just to make room. This is high I, which means investment fell. So that's my new line. Equilibrium at that level of interest rate, that level of investment is here. And this is my new level of output. This is y double prime. Y double prime. And so, at this new level of interest rate, this is the equilibrium level of investment. Of output. And you can see it's a downward sloping line. The lower we make our interest rate, the higher we make our output. If I can connect all those dots, which I can do a little green, I suppose. I don't know if I can connect all these dots. It's going to look like this. And this is going to be our IS curve. IS stands for investment savings. It is like where investment comes from. We're looking at investment. So, this is downward sloping. That is, the lower we make the interest rate, the more attractive investment is, and so the higher the level of output. The higher we make the interest rate, the less attractive investment is, and so the lower output is. So every point on this line represents equilibrium in the goods market. And the goods market, in our sort of first story, is not determining the interest rate. Of course, in the end, everything's interconnected. But in our initial story, like in the sort of driving force, the interest rate is going to be determined in the financial markets. It's sort of outside of this goods market, and then it affects this goods market. Of course, there'll be feedback effects as well. But in the first instance, changes in the interest rate are happening on the money market, not in the goods market. And so we can try every possible interest rate and find out what the equilibrium level of output is. Interest rate determines investment. Investment gives us that line, which gives us the new equilibrium level of output. The higher the interest rate, the less investment, and therefore the less output we have. It's quite the whirlwind tour of that. Looking for questions. I'm looking for what the hell I've been talking about in people's eyes. People's eyes are glazed over. Glazed over. No questions? You kind of have to work through it yourself. Like, I would recommend taking out a piece of paper or pencil and going through this a few times until you can go through it without reference to the notes or the videos. I would recommend that because we're going to add to it. I'm going to add to it right now, but like, I would go through these steps here a few times before going on to go through the steps on the next slide a few times. Like, get used to where this IS curve comes from, and then. It won't take you super long to do, but unless you take out your own pencil and paper and actually do it yourself, you won't settle in. Like, it's very easy to sort of nod along when someone's doing it themselves. It's quite another thing to do it your own self, right? So I would recommend a piece of paper trying to do it your own self. Okay? Nothing different than what I did, but just how you can do it by yourself without reference to what I did. Okay. So now, I'll look at shifts in the IS curve. I'm going to draw the same thing I had before, but simplified, because here we have land, aggregates, expenditure. We got our 45-degree line. And we've got C plus I R plus G plus X. Just up. And down below, we've got Y, we've got I, and we've got our IS curve that we just derived. This is equilibrium level of Y, equilibrium level of Y at this particular interest rate. So at that interest rate, whatever it is, picked arbitrarily, here's how things look. Okay. Of course, in order to draw this whole IS curve, we had to change the interest rate, try various interest rates, each different interest rate giving us a different point on the IS curve. Each interest rate gives us a different investment, which gives us a different planned aggregate expenditure line, gives us different output, a whole chain of events. But here we are at a particular level of interest rate. The IS curve is telling us what's going to happen if we change that interest rate, but at this particular interest rate, this is where we're at. And now I'm going to change something that I haven't changed before. So I'm going to change, for example, suppose G goes up. So government spending goes up. Just arbitrarily, I'm saying, what happens if government spending goes up? Well, all of that stuff that we did is now useless because we were trying different interest rates, but we were keeping autonomous consumption constant. We were keeping government spending constant. We were keeping net exports constant when we were doing that. But now we're changing one of those things. We're changing autonomous spending, in this case government spending, and so we're going to have to draw this whole thing again. Right. So when government spending goes up, well, government spending is right here. So at any given level of y and a given level of interest rate, this whole curve is going to shift up. So let me do that. In red. That is very sad. In a parallel way. Like so. This is G going. Same R and higher G. So all I've done is I've kept the interest rate the same interest rate here. Right? And I've drawn the thing, so investment didn't change, and I've drawn it with this higher government spending. So any particular level of income, that's the x-axis, any particular level of income, we now want to buy more stuff than before. All the people were buying the same stuff, foreigners were buying the same stuff, firms were investing the same amount because we didn't change the interest rate, but the government is buying more stuff. So the whole curve shifts up by the change in government spending. And so we get a new level of output, y prime, and we can carry that down and say at this same interest rate, we didn't change the interest rate here, at the same interest rate, this is the new level of output. And so this point here is now on our IS curve. It is now in equilibrium in the goods market. Right? So if government spending goes up, we're going to shift this curve at every level of interest rate. We are now going to have a higher level of output that gives us equilibrium in the goods market. And so the whole curve is going to shift to the right. That is, at any particular level of interest rate, people are now buying more stuff because the government's buying more stuff. And so there's a more haircuts being given, and therefore there's a higher level of output that's in equilibrium in the goods market. So again, we're keeping interest rate the same. Any particular point that we tried, right, before we had a point that looks like this when our government spending was low, equilibrium looks like that at that particular interest rate. Now with the same interest rate, we're going to have a higher level of output. Okay? And that's going to be true whatever level of interest rate we try. It's going to be shifting to the right. It's shifting to the right because this is determining output. Right? The goods market determines output. So it can only shift left and right. It can't shift up and down. I know it looks like the same graphically as up and down or out, but it is not. It's shifting to the right from the story. Right? For a given level of interest rate, which we pick totally arbitrarily, what level of output do we get? So shifting left and right, not out, not up, but to the right and to the left, right, from the story. Then again, we want our story, our math, and our graphs to all be telling the same thing. Right? And so our story is about interest rate gets picked, gets chosen somehow in the financial markets. Right? It's determined by the financial markets, and we wonder what level of output gives us equilibrium in the goods market. So our story is about interest rate is falling from the sky, from a totally separate market, but that's going to affect things in the goods market. How does it affect them in the goods market? Well, it shifts things right and left. It changes the amount of output that we have in this economy. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I will see you, 8 days from now? 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from today. We will see each other again. Have a good reading week. And we will continue this.